Thank you for joining Sports Development Series. We yours truly, Boma Ekiora.
Our Sportdev series is sponsored by Arewa Baobab Fruit Powder, one of the most nutritious substances on the planet. Get your Baobab Fruit Powder from arewabaobab.com.
Sportdev series, welcome guys. Thank you for joining us. So, in transition from our AFCON Players to Watch series, we're now going into predictions for the very first few sets of games leading into the tournament. Tournament kicks off on January 13th. So once it kicks off, we'll take a look at a couple of games and then try to predict, or if we have sessions where we have to talk about certain games, we'll go into those. So I think in looking at it, we have the opening game on the 13th of January, where Cote D'Ivoire will play Guinea-Bissau. And then on the 14th of January, which is a Sunday, you have three games: Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, Egypt, Mozambique, Ghana, Cape Verde. Should be interesting. These are pretty good games across the board. And it should be really telling when you look at them. But let's start with the first one, which would be Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau. One thing I like to do when I look at teams is I try to take a look at their market value as a team. So the transfer market value of the entire team. And if you were to go strictly by that, you'd say, okay, this is a David versus Goliath situation. Clearly you say, okay, well, because Cote d'Ivoire has a transfer market value of 334 million. This is according to Transfer Market, while Guinea-Bissau has 26.23 million, right? If you look at along the roster for Guinea-Bissau and you look at the roster for Cote d'Ivoire, I mean, it's night and day in terms of valuation of players, the clubs they play for, and the like. The most valuable player on Guinea-Bissau squad is Mama Balde. I think he's worth about 6 million euros. And, he's a good player, plays for Lyon, does his thing, But when you look at the Cote d'Ivoire team, I think Ousmane Diomande from Sporting Lisbon is the highest there, about 40 million. But then you do have the likes of Sergio Aurier, you have Frank Kessie, you have a lot of really good players that play for that team. They haven't been able to come together as a unit. But when you look at the last string of games they've played over, qualification leading into AFCON, you immediately realize that, okay, so these guys haven't really lost a lot of games. They've kind of beaten everyone. Their most recent win was against Sierra Leone, 5-1 thrashing. And so you immediately see they've been consistent. They're playing at home in a game where they want to prove something. They play Nigeria next, so they want to send a message out. I see this as pretty much a whitewash and a destruction of Guinea-Bissau. I really don't see how Guinea-Bissau could pull this off, especially when you look at the forms these teams are in at the moment. Guinea-Bissau, they've kind of struggled leading into this. They lost a recent friendly against Mali. Mali puts 6 goals past them. And if you look at the qualifiers, the World Cup qualifiers they've played recently, I mean, they beat Djibouti 1-0. They drew against Burkina Faso. So they don't seem to score a lot of goals. And, they look to let in a lot. And when you look at the caliber of players they have, it just doesn't match. So I just don't see them doing anything significant here. Cote d'Ivoire all the way. I see a total destruction by Cote d'Ivoire. All right. So let's go into the next game here. We have Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea. So this is interesting. So you could look at this and say, okay, Yeah, Super Eagles are going to just do what they do and kind of walk through this one. I don't think it's going to be that easy. And here's why. If you look at it, first of all, let's do the transfer market value thing. If you look at the transfer market values for both teams, obviously anyone that knows anything about world football will tell you Nigeria definitely has a lot. And Nigeria does. Transfer market value for the team total is 349 million euros. You know, you compare that to you know, Equatorial Guinea, which is I think they're about, if I'm not mistaken, a couple of about maybe 9 million euros. Yeah, 9.8 million euros, if I'm not mistaken. So you think about it as just night and day in terms of value. And you look through the quality of players. The center back for Equatorial Guinea has the highest value, Sao Koko, and he's valued at 3 million. So if you were looking at strength of squads, okay, Nigeria gets the edge without question. You look at current forms of the teams, and I think that's where it becomes interesting. So Equatorial Guinea, they qualified for this tournament, and then you look at their recent World Cup qualifiers, and that's where I see this team not being so easy to walk over. Here's why. So they beat Liberia in the recent qualifiers, even though Liberia did get a red card. They beat Namibia. They drew against Burkina Faso. And when it starts to get interesting is, for the Nations Cup qualifiers, they drew against Libya in the last two games. They drew against Libya, and then they beat Tunisia, which is not an easy feat. So they seem like a team that's difficult to score on, but they also don't score a lot of goals. Most of these games are either 1-1 or 1-0 or 0-0. So that tells you something, that they may be hard to break down, but they also have figured out how to squeak out victories against, better competition. So, the Super Eagles do have some work on their hands here. It may not be as easy as people would think it should be or could be. And Nigeria has had a recent history of not beating teams they should have beat. And when I say that, I mean, when you look at it, okay, last two games. Let's look at last three games, right? Zimbabwe, 1-1. Lesotho, 1-1, right? And then they beat Mozambique 3-2. Mozambique got a red card, even though they were dominating that game, right? When you look at the Lesotho and the Zimbabwe game, these were games that Nigeria should have won. These are both World Cup qualifiers, by the way. So it makes it very interesting. And it shows that this thing is maybe not as easy as it should be. But the Nigerian team does have Victor Osimhen back, which would be huge. And they have time to actually prep going into this. So that could also be huge. So I think those are two factors that could play a role. All right. So the next game we have here is Egypt versus Mozambique. Transfer market value, again, Egypt is obviously the highest one here. 135 million versus 25 million is not even a question. We all know the kind of players that are on the Egyptian squad, but it's not just the kind of players that are on their squad. It's how they play together as a team. And they've been able to do that pretty well going into this tournament. I think, on the 7th, which is 7th of January, they beat Tanzania 2-0 in a friendly. Looking at their games going into qualification, they were able to just handily beat teams. They beat Sierra Leone. I mean, Djibouti. Not that these are world beaters, but they did beat some teams. And then if you go farther back, they beat Zambia, drew with Algeria, and lost to Tunisia last year towards the latter part of the year. So this Egyptian team, I don't know. I don't think, to be honest with you, it's the kind of team that had Mohamed Abu Treka, where they won, AFCON championships. He just doesn't seem like that kind of team. But we'll see. Egypt is the kind of team that kind of shows up in these tournaments and comes together. So looking at them against Mozambique, Mozambique is, if you look at the games they've played in COSAFA, and the qualification series leading into the World Cup, they really haven't played anyone. The teams they did play that were good, they lost to. They lost to Nigeria, they lost to Algeria, they beat Lesotho and Botswana, and then drew with Angola on October 13th last year. So they haven't really done anything to show they're the real deal. They concede goals, even against teams that they beat. And I don't see how they would play, an Egyptian team with the likes of Mohamed Salah and the kind of players that can really punish you, and not concede goals. I just don't see it. So my prediction there is clearly going to be in favor of Egypt. Egypt takes care of that one pretty handedly. So the final game on 14th is Ghana, Cabo Verde. This is on Sunday, the 14th. This should be fun to watch. Cabo Verde, in the last couple of years, have always been able to play very well and compete. Ghana, with some of the players they have, experience, really good players, they should be playing better than they have been. If you look at their last 3 games last year, they got trounced by the United States. I saw that game. It was heartbreaking. In the U.S., they traveled over there for a friendly match. Then they beat Madagascar and beat Comoros. They played Mexico in another friendly, lost that one as well. And before that, they beat Liberia. So Ghana hasn't been promising. It hasn't been the team that you would look at and say, boom, strong team going all the way. Definitely has not been a promising team. And it's going to be difficult to see how far they go in this tournament. Ghana, that is. But when you look at Cabo Verde, on the other hand, they've done okay, but not really that well. When they did play tough competition like Algeria, October 12th of last year, they lost. They got trounced by 5 goals. They lost to Comoros. So the Cabo Verde team that we had seen, I think a couple of years ago, that qualified into or closely qualified into the World Cup, they competed very well. I don't think that's the same team. I don't think I'm wrong on that. I just don't see them being the same team. But we'll see. They do have a friendly match against Tunisia on January 10th, so that may give us some more insight to who they are. But if I was to pick a victor in this match, I'm going with the Black Stars, Ghana all the way. All right? So for the games on the 13th and 14th, those are the predictions, at least from a Sportdev perspective. I think, some of the typical names we've seen could pull it off. My banana peel, this might sound strange, but it could be on the Super Eagles. Maybe getting a draw in that game. And I hate to say that because that's my team, but it's it could be. Equatorial Guinea is, when you look at what they've done and who they've done it to, you do ask yourself that, okay, if Nigeria doesn't figure out a way to score goals against these guys, it could be one of those drawn out games, very frustrating, because Equatorial Guinea hasn't allowed a lot of goals going into this tournament. But I'm still picking the Super Eagles. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. And if you haven't, like, subscribe, all that great stuff. If not, we'll just keep broadcasting and talk to you soon. All the best.